Okay. All right, David, you ready to rock and roll?
Yes.
Let's do this. Okay, David, so just quickly introduce yourself here so we know a little bit about you, who you are, what you do, and then we can go from there.
Hi, I'm David Adams, and I'm a serial entrepreneur, product manager, UX designer, uh, product strategist, and I've been involved in a lot of startup companies over 20 years or so, mostly in e-commerce, software as a service. And my current company, Chargeback, is a SaaS fintech company that helps merchants deal with credit card disputes, helps them prevent credit card disputes and recover funds lost to disputes. So I've become quite an expert in arcane credit card network rules of evidence. And I've gotten to work with a lot of companies, including 7 Fortune 500s, who are using our services to help them recover millions and millions of dollars that they would have otherwise lost to fraud and other kinds of disputes.
You know, until I actually visited, I think it was your LinkedIn, I saw that the amount of money that is lost with disputes from credit cards is pretty amazing. That's such a high number of, such a high dollar amount that I never would have guessed unless I actually read it somewhere. So that's a very good market to be in, I feel like, number one. But David, I want to move on to some of the questions I had for you. First off, I want to get it kicked off with the random one because I like to keep it fun and light on the show. So the question that I had for you here was, if you were one sport, any sport, what would you be? Like, what sport would you be?
Um, I'm going to have to go with like the biathlon
Really?
because uh, I think I could never be just one thing, and I love the idea of doing something and then having to immediately go and do something totally different from that.
Yes.
The thing that makes the biathlon cool, and I'll have to say that there are some other sports such as chess boxing that
Mm-hmm.
have the same sort of dynamic, is that you're there on your skis and you're just ripping down the slopes and trying to cover some country, and your heart rate is going and your adrenaline is going, and then you have to lie down and do something precision. You have to hit the target,
Exactly.
right? And so if I can categorize my trajectory, it's always um, uh, ping-ponging between one thing and another thing that might be totally different.
Yeah, that's awesome. That stuff takes so much skill. It's ridiculous. And I've watched some of that in the Olympics where they do the skiing and then they lay down and they shoot the rifle. And I couldn't imagine how fast their heart is beating. It just amazes me, the type of training. It's ridiculous. Okay, so David, one of the first questions I think to get kicked off, obviously with the content that I want to get from you, Chargeback is your company that you're building currently. To start off with this story, why don't you just tell us how that originally came about, the idea, where did it come from, what was the situation like? Just tell us here how you even came up with the idea to start Chargeback.
It's one of the more interesting starts to a company that I was involved in, because the company itself started 6 or 7 years prior to my becoming involved. So
Wow.
it was a company that was started with a pretty simple idea to try to automate the process of responding to credit card disputes. They raised money from a bunch of prominent local Utah-based investors and set off to execute on that idea. They did a lot of things that you're kind of supposed to do in the sort of the lean startup philosophy. Don't be afraid to put systems in place that aren't scalable,
Mm,
so that you can test the market. But
interesting.
what ended up happening to that company is they got caught in the lean startup trap, and they essentially became a, I mean, their technology was a loose collection of not particularly stable automation tools that were used by a cubicle farm full of people to do a lot of manual data entry tasks. So there
Uh,
was no, they never were able to execute on their idea of a public facing software as a service dispute management platform. And they tried to do it, and never really got it working or off the ground. They ended up having a revolving door of CEOs
mm,
and eventually ran out of money, and the investors opted not to put any more money into the company, and it went into liquidation. So where I became involved was that the investors, the owners of this liquidated company, still believed in the original idea. And so they brought in a team to try to execute on that original idea and sort of pick up some pieces from the scrap
yeah.
heap, including some customers that were actually still a small group of people were still sitting in the cubicles doing this manual work. And so we had like a core of customers, and we had, some research that had been done. There was some institutional knowledge that still existed there. And so we set out to execute on that original idea. And it took us about a year. And we had some false starts. We made a failed attempt to develop like a fully self-onboarding, very stripped down version of an automated platform for the small to medium sized market, and that didn't really pick up. But what did happen is we got, in particular, one company, one Fortune 500 company, agreed to be our test subject, and we tailored that initial prototype toward their particular needs, and we got it working. And it was a long slog, and but within like 48 hours of this company getting up and running on our new platform, they had a team of 17 or 18 people working full time in their headquarters, doing nothing but responding to credit card disputes all day.
Jeez.
And they were only responding to half of every day's disputes before they had to start over again and get working on the next day's disputes. And so, they were losing, tens of thousands of dollars a day just because they
Yeah.
couldn't get to the work. And within a day or two of being up and running on our platform and learning how to use it, they were working 100% of their disputes. And within a few weeks after that, they were starting to reassign people from that team to work on other projects because they didn't need that many people to do the work. So it was, we built a quick and dirty prototype, and we just, we did some experiments. We went down some dead ends. We did some things that were successful. We racked up a lot of technical debt.
Mm,
We did a lot of non-scalable stuff. The fact that we had this genesis as a company with a bunch of people who were accustomed to doing manual things, we used them as a crutch. We had a team of
yeah.
people that were able to do various kinds of manual or semi-manual data entry tasks in order to get around things that we hadn't developed yet. It was a double-edged sword because it allowed us to succeed, but it also, we depended on those sort of non-scalable things probably
Yeah.
longer than we needed to. And about 2 years ago, we made a fateful decision that we needed to put most of our new product development on hold and spend some time. It ended up being about a year shoring up the foundation, um, and essentially rebuilding a lot of our infrastructure in order to enable us to scale.
Yeah.
Because we have new clients that are coming on board, every month, that are dramatically increasing the total number of transactions that we're dealing with, and we've got to be able to handle the volume.
Exactly. So I definitely want to dive into a couple points there of what you had as an intro to Chargeback, how it even got created. Um, you said that in the beginning, the company obviously had that lean startup mentality, right? But they got caught up in that lean startup mentality. So for you, obviously, everybody has to start that way in some form, right? So the question I want to ask you is, what would you tell somebody that's new to the space of entrepreneurship, growing a lean startup? When is that point to change, and what are some key indicators of what that would look like to know you need to start actually creating a scalable company and not stay lean and save a lot of money? What would you say to that person?
I mean, I can make a little bit of a generalization in that if you look at different kinds of philosophies, if you look at different kinds of frameworks, or uh, you know so-called best practices, um, you need to understand the the limitations of the doctrines and the dogmas, um,
Mm.
because it, for example, you can get very strict about always validating your ideas very thoroughly prior to prior to investing huge amounts of resources into developing that idea or trying to bring it to light.
Mhm.
But it's always it's always a spectrum. There's always you can take it too far in one direction or the other, right?
Yeah,
You can
extremes.
you can
Yeah.
be you can be the idea of lean startup was a reaction against an all too common impulse for people to spend long periods of time developing some new product or service or feature, only to find out after that all that time and money has been spent that nobody wants it, right? That it was the wrong
Hmm.
thing. And so, yeah, that's a truth. You shouldn't do that thing, but you can take it too far in the other direction. You can
That's
spend
true.
you can spend so much time validating and testing that you never pull the trigger on anything, and
Yeah.
that you never take any risks, right? Because sometimes you have to take a risk. I mean, there's this probably apocryphal Henry Ford quip about how if he'd listened to his customers, he would have built a faster horse. And the reason why that whether or not that Henry Ford actually said that, the reason that gag has staying power is because of that kernel of truth there. Sometimes you have to go out on a limb. Sometimes you can't get somebody to validate your idea.
Hmm.
Sometimes uh, now sometimes you can put some potential ideas in front of people. You can start like with a kernel of creativity, and then you can see how people react to that.
Exactly.
Which is definitely something that you should do as you're validating your market, or doing demand experiments.
Yeah.
But sometimes you just have to take the risk and
Yeah.
do something, because the world doesn't know it needs that thing until it's confronted with it.
That's true. So, David, what I wanted to touch on now, something that you said in the intro, um, you said that you got a test subject in the beginning to sort of morph your MVP, if you want to call it, to this test subject, kind of see how it works, really just experiment. So, that first test subject that you had, how did you acquire that test subject? What was the steps to actually get in touch with that person to bring them on board? What did you go through to get that basically into your company? That
I think we met them at a trade show. I think we met them at an event, and it wasn't one. We didn't have a booth there. We didn't at that point. We didn't have the funds to like have booths at events. We just went and just talked to people.
really.
Um, and and I mean, if you're gonna take away any wisdom from that, I mean, I'll have to say something that permeates my entire career trajectory is just luck, just
Really?
just having things work out. I mean, every good thing that has happened to me, I can attribute to good luck in some ways, and a lot of the bad things I can attribute to bad luck. And so it's like, where does luck end and skill begin? I think that everything, almost all things start with a little bit of luck, and sort of the skill is what you do with it once it falls in your lap, right?
Mm.
So, we happened to run across somebody at this company. They had a serious problem with disputes. It was, and they were out on the hunt looking for somebody to help them with it. And, they happened to run into somebody from our company who has a real gift for selling a vision. And in fact, like a lot of good salespeople, actually has a problem with bending the truth.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe that's too strong, but I should say, inadvertently committing us to things that we may or may not be able to execute on, right?
Yeah, what's new?
But by the time that potential client sort of realized how close we were to actually having the solution, they had bought into the vision, and they were willing to give us 90 days to make it happen. And that 90 days turned into 6 months, and that 6 months turned into a year.
Yeah. They were very committed. So, David, what I want to ask now is just a progression into the story of Chargeback. When this was all happening, you had your first test subject. When was the first step or the first point in time that you actually saw scale? Tell us about that point in time and how that actually became a point of scale for you.
Well, that first client that we had ended up recommending us to a bunch of other companies. And companies that they worked with, or companies that were sort of in their orbit. And then the ability to tell that success story also allowed us to reach out to other companies, maybe competitors of theirs that they might not have recommended us to, but who were very keen on hearing the story about how their big competitor had solved a problem that they also have, right? So, we ended up putting a huge amount of time into making things work for this one company. They eventually ended up paying us a lot of money, but not nearly enough for all the work that we had to do. But of course it paid off huge dividends because, we used them as a reference. They have talked to potential partners on our behalf. They've talked to uh, uh, potential investors that later became
Wow.
investors in our Series A on our behalf. And so, I mean, the takeaway that I could say is, find one or some core group of customers, bend over backward to make it work for them, and then see if you can put them to work for you.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the only way to make it work in enterprise software.
Really. So what I want to know now is knowing that the first couple of people or that group of people that can be your very loyal, those test subjects, the people that really get things going for you, give you recommendations. How would you tell a newer, younger entrepreneur to go about finding those people in really any market, or what do you think is just the best way to really find that group of people, either on the internet, or do we go to these startup conventions? What would you recommend and tell to newer, younger entrepreneurs if they have an idea, they've got something going already, they just need that first or couple companies or people just to really get things kicked off the right way? What do you say to that newer entrepreneur if he's asking that?
Um, I mean, to be honest, sales isn't my thing. I don't claim to be awesome at it. Um, my portion of the work that needs to be done is being able to articulate a an inspiring vision for the product. So, part of what I do is I am uh, communicating with and coordinating a bunch of different stakeholders, related to my company and my product. So, the management team of the company, different employees with different roles, our users, our partners, our potential users, and I'm gathering intelligence from all of these sources, and I'm trying to organize it in a way so that the people at the company who are involved in strategic decision making can easily digest all of this information
Yeah.
about what is the market, what are people demanding, what are our competitors doing, what are the people in the front lines, the tech support people and the training people, what are they discovering, and what are we learning from looking at our data and doing analytics about how people are using the platform, all of this
Yeah.
information and distilling it down. And then we have the strategic decision making people within the company, and ironically, the better, the smarter, the more impressive and dynamic that group of people is, the harder it is to get them to coalesce around a single vision, because they've got their own ideas and they're able to articulate those ideas skillfully and forcefully. And so, it's a challenge to get everybody united behind a single vision. But if you don't, if your vision is too scattershot, or if it isn't well described, then you're not going to be able to communicate that vision outside the company. It'll be even worse. If you can't articulate the vision to the people inside the company, you're going to have an even harder time articulating the vision to people outside the company.
Yeah.
So, what do you, so going back to your original question about, what do you do to get somebody interested? A lot of it has to do with truly understanding the problems that they have. Sometimes
Yeah.
understanding those problems better than they do. They might only have a really superficial understanding of what their problems are. They're only seeing the stuff right in front of them, not
Yeah, the
the
tip of the
deep
iceberg.
roots of the problem, right? So having a really good understanding of what that problem is, and then being able to describe in a very, very clear and exciting way what your solution is. That's kind of at the root of getting people to buy into that vision.
Yeah.
And and then of course there is a certain, like I say, there's a certain amount of luck of being able to get in front of the right person to talk to, and then there's some skill just about being good at listening and being good at sort of communicating that vision and have them catch it.
Yeah. So, David, I want to work our way back, rewind in a way, back to a section in the beginning I forgot to touch on, I think would be useful to ask. So, for a new entrepreneur, one of their biggest things I feel like, and what I've seen, is finding the right people to either work with, to be around, someone that can really help them on their journey of success as an entrepreneur, a businessman, really just being on their own, right? So, for you, when you came into this company, I am not aware of how many co-founders you have or people that are with you starting this and running the company. But for those amount of people, how did you put yourself in the situation of getting with them, starting this company? And what would you recommend just a newer entrepreneur do to really do the same and find people that, are very hard workers, very intelligent, money smart, whatever it might be? What do you say to that person?
Um, I would say that I'm not good at that at all. Um,
No way. I don't believe it.
one of my most successful companies, which I started in the late '90s, um, I started with three co-founders, and we set out to do something, to develop a new e-commerce platform uh, that was um, very flexible, good for more complex business-to-business e-commerce environments, and we wanted to do to make it open source. We wanted to participate in the open source movement that was really starting to catch fire in the late '90s. And we started off building some stuff and getting some clients and doing some things, but when things got a little hard, my three co-founders ended up flaking out on me and going and
No
doing other
way.
things and getting jobs. So I ended up starting this company by myself, and hiring some other people, mostly young, pretty young people, and we ended up uh, doing some more work on it, and I raised some seed financing, and we really scaled up, and it became a pretty successful thing. And but some of the people that I ended up hiring ended up awesome. Some of those people, to this day, I regret ever meeting those people, right? And I can say that about all of my companies. My very first company also had 4 or 5 co-founders, and
Yeah.
I won't name any names, but not all of them were awesome. And and so I think it's very hard. It's hard to find co-founders. It's hard to find awesome co-founders, and it's hard to find awesome employees.
Hmm.
And I don't think that there's any shortcuts. I've worked with people that to this day I consider to be close friends, that I really regret going into business with those people.
Hmm.
even though I liked them as people then, and I continue to like them now. I've gone into business with people who are awesome that I would never want to sit down for a meal with them because I just don't like them personally as people. Um, and then of course there are people who fall into the other quadrants. You know, people who are awesome collaborators and coworkers, and who are awesome people, and people who are lousy coworkers and are lousy people. And
Exactly.
you know, so uh, in the startup world, for good or ill, it's pretty common for people to go into business with one another with people who are like them, right?
True.
It creates a lack of diversity, both in the socioeconomic sense, but also in the sort of the diversity of thought sense. That, you know, you tend to go with people that you might know, that you know through social connections. You go with people that you like on a personal level, and uh, and honestly, I don't know whether I would say any of those sort of shortcuts are really particularly reliable. I
Yeah.
would say that uh, interviewing people, even putting people through really grueling interviews, it's not a particularly good way to separate the wheat from the chaff. There are people who interview very well who perform abominably. There are people uh, uh, who have difficulty communicating, who uh, have weird affectations, uh, who are amazing once you can crack their shell a little bit, or once you can figure out their quirks. Um, and you know, there are some good rules of thumb, like, you know, a lot of people have said, you know, it's just not worth it to work with somebody who's a real asshole, no matter how smart they are. And that's probably mostly true. Although I have a couple of counterexamples of people that really were jerks. But I found that I was able to work with them very productively.
It's weird how it works. It's weird how it works.
Yeah, honestly, I guess the only thing I can say, the only generalization that I can say is you do have to end up sort of going with your gut. You do have to end up just taking what you can get. Uh, making a decision when somebody crosses your path, and then just try to figure it out. And and probably the hardest thing to do is to is to be able to recover once you realize that you've made a bad choice, right? uh, when you hire somebody and you realize that they're not going to work out, it's very common to take way too long to do the thing that you know that you need to do, which is to fire them. You know,
Exactly.
if you've got if you're working on a scheme with some people to be co-founders with, and you start seeing red flags at the beginning, and you're like, oh, I really believe in this idea, but I just don't know if I want to go into business with these people. It's hard to be able to just walk away and say, I'm just not going to do this thing. And so yeah, I think that's the only enduring advice that I can do is, no matter what you do, you're going to end up you're going to end up running across some of the wrong people, and just be brave enough to do what you need to do in order to get them out, even if it means you have to get out yourself.
Exactly. I think that what you're saying is completely true for anything in entrepreneurship. You kind of got to take the bull by the horns and really just make these decisions every day. Not just of, firing people if that what it is, if that's what it is, or, making a huge decision that might be risky. Like it's just something that entrepreneurs sign up for in a way, and what I've seen especially. So David, I want to ask one question before we work our way into just general ones of your entrepreneurial journey. I don't want to go too much over our time, so I'm going to try to make this question fast, but I definitely want to ask it. So for you, your skills as a co-founder or someone really that is just a valuable asset to any business, how did you go about gaining those skills for somebody that is an entrepreneur? Obviously different people have different specialties, right? There might be someone that's a co-founder that is technical, someone that knows how to market very well, like yourself, someone that knows product building, e-commerce very well. How did you go about gaining the skills that you have now? What would you recommend people do as well to gain skills like yours, or just really any skill? Is there any certain way that is best?
I mean, I'm not sure that I would recommend the approach that I had to take, because I was forced to learn everything from scratch. Most of the things that I got involved in, I had to. I was part of the kind of making it up as we went along. You know, e-commerce, starting with web development. I mean, I got started when I was an undergraduate working as a research assistant for a biology professor. I got started just because of the guy who was running the Gopher server, the pre-web internet server, had graduated. So I got assigned to running the Gopher server, and I decided to migrate it over to the web, which was just emerging. So I became a self-taught web developer. And and then, I was still an undergrad at the time. I met up with some other people that wanted to start an internet company. And, we weren't even sure what we were going to do. We just knew we wanted to do something with the internet. And so, we ended up doing e-commerce, but, there wasn't a playbook for e-commerce. We had to make up stuff as we went along. We ended up sort of accidentally inventing software as a service, because we wanted to make a tool that allowed merchants to use a web browser and log in and enter in the stuff that they needed so that they could sell stuff online. And we weren't the only people who were inventing software as a service at the time, but
Yeah.
there wasn't a playbook, right? And so probably the thing that made me well suited for that inhabiting that kind of world where we just had to figure stuff out is that I've always enjoyed tinkering. I've always been willing to sort of experiment with things. I'm really good at research. I love doing research. I'm an information vacuum. And so, realizing that I don't know how to do a thing that I want to do doesn't discourage me. It energizes me. So, that's what I can say. That's what I could say to somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur. I think doing research, enjoying doing research, not being daunted by the blank page, is it's probably a good attribute to have. I don't know if you can teach yourself to be that way or if it's innate, but it's helped me.
I believe anything is possible. So, I mean, I would try to do it if it was me. But David, I think that what you said about experimentation really is that is really amazing. I feel like for someone to inherit as a new entrepreneur, just to have that hands-on experience, I feel like is really, really useful in the beginning, just to learn the things that you need to learn, if you're getting into whatever space it is. So David, I want to ask a couple of questions based on just your experience growing multiple companies. The first one being more of a generalized question, but I wanted to ask, how are you able to really successfully start companies time and time again? Is there something, backstage that we don't really see that you do to grow multiple companies, to have multiple successful companies in particular? Um, what is it? Is it like a really managed, really well managed calendar? What are those things that make that possible that you can tell us?
Um, I think part of the secret to my success is that I don't actually know how to be successful. Um, I, I've been able to become successful, but I can't really stay there. So, when I'm doing something and I build something up that sort of, we catch a tiger by the tail, we, we figure out a scalable, repeatable business model, we build something that people want. It doesn't take me long before I have the itch to start over. I live for the struggle, and and the formula that I developed from my last success doesn't necessarily work for my next one because I'm doing something a little bit different each time.
Exactly.
I'm taking on a different role. I'm entering into a new market. And plus, since, as I said before, a lot of it has to do with particular luck that you hit along the way. You can follow your so-called roadmap to success and end up in failure because you hit different you hit different roadblocks.
Mm-hmm.
And so when things start to go smoothly, I do get the itch to start something that's difficult. And that doesn't necessarily mean like I'm going to immediately quit my job or sell my company and do something else. I mean, sometimes the difficult thing that I take on is a personal project that that keeps me occupied or allows me a creative outlet.
Yeah. So, David, knowing that you said that there's different markets that you're growing businesses in, different challenges, what are the actual similarities that you can tell us and expect to see if we were to do the same thing, growing multiple companies? What are those similarities that we can know will come?
Um, I mean, are you asking what are some sort of general principles that I've learned from starting companies, or are you asking what are some similarities between the actual things that I've done over my career?
Uh, what you said first is what I think I was implying. That would be probably the best answer.
Mm-hmm. Um, I mean, I'll have to say that the the one thing that has enabled me to do everything that I've accomplished has been not being afraid to take a risk. Because at one point I had to take a step into the abyss each and every time. I had to trust somebody that I didn't really have enough information to know whether I could trust them. I had to to make a gamble on an idea that wasn't properly verified. Um, I had to have faith that I was going to be able to understand something in the future that I didn't currently understand. I had to do something like move across the country to a new place and trust that I'll be able to figure things out. I had to um, put my financial security on the line, even when I wasn't sure which way the economic winds were going to blow. I had to, on several occasions, I've hit the jackpot and made a bunch of money by selling a company that I started. And several times I've basically taken all of those chips and put them back on the table in order to start something else. And in a couple of cases, I lost the majority of the chips. I mean, I've had 5 successful exits. So I've had VC funded companies that had a successful exit, and I've made some money, and my investors have made money. And if that's the only thing that I'd done in my career, I'd be much, much richer.
Yeah.
Right? Because I've also had some failures.
So David, with these companies, were you running multiple at one time?
So I have done a few things at once. So my very first company, one of the things that we did was we decided to do an eat your own dog food project. So we're developing an e-commerce platform for small businesses, and we decided let's everybody like start an e-commerce business. And some of the people at the company just sort of goofed around and put stuff up online that wasn't really real, but a few of us actually started real businesses, and 2 of us started businesses that actually became successful. So one of our salespeople started a business selling discount magazine subscriptions because he had some kind of a source.
No way.
And
awesome.
And I started because I was and still am really interested in mountain biking. I started a company called Aardvark Cycles that sold high-end mountain bike parts and accessories. And I co-founded it with a friend of mine. We'd both worked at bike shops before, and so we're just like, we put up the website, and we started like stocking up inventory and putting it in my friend's basement, and ran an e-retailer out of his garage. And it was moderately successful. We did sell it a couple of years later to a local bike equipment manufacturer, and they continued to run it successfully for several more years after that. And my co-founder went to medical school and now is an emergency room doctor who helped people recover from crashes on mountain bikes using parts that probably sold to them. And and then I actually have an online news site called OS News that has been publishing daily for 18 years. And wow. More than 20 years now. And I've sort of run that as a hobby, all of this time. That doesn't take up a lot of my time. So every once in a while I'll have more than one iron in the fire, but for the most part it's it's one at a time.
Yeah. That's cool. So David, we have met our time, but I want to ask one last question before we say goodbye. This question is another general one, but I think it's more philosophical than any of the other questions I've asked. Going back to Chargeback and thinking of how you grew it, all the processes that you put in place to do so, what was the most creative / low cost solution you've pursued in the business? And tell us the why behind it too. Why was it that way? Why was it? It's a tough one.
I think that one of the unsung, it's simultaneously one of the most important features and also one of the sort of least well understood features of our platform is our expert system. So the credit card networks they each have rules that determine their dispute procedures. And these are like 400 page documents, and each of the credit card networks has one. Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex, they each have a big document. And these rules change every 6 months. Like sometimes there will be just like little nitpicky changes, and sometimes there will be like a sea change, like a really, really big change that affects everything. And one of the challenges that people in our industry have is very few people really understand these rules. When a dispute comes in, they don't really realize how different the evidence requirements are for responding to dispute A versus dispute B.
Yeah.
And so they'll just do like a kind of a one size fits all response, and they won't get very good. They won't get very good results. And a lot of companies, there will be like maybe one grizzled veteran who really like has an understanding of how these things work. But oftentimes that person is gone, and everyone else is just working off of templates that they created like 12 years prior. So that's one of the big changes that we have, is that in our platform, when a dispute comes in, our system pays attention to, or it interprets which credit card network it is, what's the reason code, certain modifiers, and certain aspects of the business model of that particular client. And we indicate which specific evidence is applicable in this case.
Yeah.
And it's something that happens transparently. I think our users don't even really recognize how much heavy lifting this one sort of piece of kind of obscure technology is doing. But it's making a huge difference. And on the one hand, we used a relatively low-tech way to encode all of this data, but
Really?
high effort. Because essentially what it requires is, it does require one person to really, really understand those rules, to stay constantly up to task on the changes, and interpret what the changes mean and how to encode those into a machine readable format. So it's a hard thing. It does require expertise, but the nice thing is that one person's efforts to make sure that all of this information is sort of encoded incorrectly affects thousands of users that now just have to be able to do what the machine tells them to
do. What an amazing piece of software or code there that you have. It really probably saves a lot of time, I feel like, a lot of heartache. In particular, how long did it take to implement that? Was it quite a long process, or was it pretty relatively simple and short?
It's 4.5 years and counting.
Really? Really?
Yeah, I mean, we're refining it a little bit. At least once a month, we're making tweaks to that. So it took several people like a solid 4 or 5 months just to get the basic the basic infrastructure put together at the beginning, and then just constant refinement over time to kind of keep it up to date.
That's amazing. That is quite the project there, it sounds like. But David, that's all the questions that I had for you. It looks like our time here is up. I don't want to take up too much of your time. So if you want to just give us any place we can find you, LinkedIn, whatever you prefer, shoot that out now, and then we'll say goodbye.
If anyone wants to follow me on Twitter, I'm David underscore Adams. And I don't know if I say anything interesting there, but you can at least see what's up.
What was the one site that you're posting on? Is that O2? What was that called again?
Oh, osnews.com. Yeah,
OS
if
News.
you want to read about the latest in operating systems and new computing technology, check out osnews.com.
For any of those technical people out there, that is a perfect URL to visit. So, David, I want to thank you for your time here. It was definitely a pleasure to chat and talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey. So, I just want to thank you, man. It was awesome.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.